Well, good morning. We have a fantastic show for you today. If you're joining us for the way forward, that's probably because you've seen this show before, and you know we don't shy away from anything. This morning, we're going to be dealing with the Ottawa truckers' strike and protest that's going on in Canada. But wait, it has spread to other parts of the world. There's some interesting tidbits here that I think, as followers of Christ, we can not only learn from in this, but we can take away to propel us into a glorious and hopeful future. So stick with us this morning. The co-host of the show is Jason Plummer. He's joining us from Litchfield, Illinois. Jason, welcome to the show with some fire.
What's up?
What's going on, my man?
Just keeping it real. Trying to keep it on the up.
Yeah. Keep it steady there in Litchfield.
That's right. Keep the train moving. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Exactly. So what's the temperature this week?
It's actually warm. We're having a bit of a heat wave. It's like 40. 40, 42. I think might even hit 48 today.
Woo!
So, yeah, it's back to its bipolar self. We got rid of most of some of that snow.
Yeah.
It's
Man, I had to run from there, man. I was up in Michigan and it was bone freezing cold.
No, we're not Michigan by any means. That's a whole other level of
they don't play.
Yeah. That's like Wisconsin, Minnesota cold. I was listening to a YouTuber talk about, he's in Minnesota, and I was just having this conversation with my wife about people were shutting things down here and getting all nuts because we had like 10 inches of snow.
Mm-hmm.
And he reminded the same thing I said to my wife, that the only time we stopped school in Wisconsin or Minnesota was when it got too cold to actually be there. Like the diesel in the buses would gel up because it's like -60. And so you can't run the buses. Or the heaters would work, but they wouldn't put up enough heat to heat the classroom. That's the only time we had a snow day in Wisconsin. Come hell or high water, we were at school.
And that's what made you tough. That's what made you the man you are today.
That's right. Yeah, no doubt about that. So, yeah, so we're good. We're doing our thing. So,
well, I want to say good morning to everybody that's out there. We are having a pre-record today because, well, you know, I'm engaged in a speech and debate tournament. Woohoo!
Yay.
Let's go get them.
High school or junior high?
Well, Jasmine's in junior high, and so this is her first speech and debate tournament. So I judged this morning.
Really a debate tournament.
Well, all the usual suspects are there, and so you know, there are some high school and some upper divisions that are there, and so they're doing their thing.
You know, I debated 1 year in high school, and then I went to college and debated. And man, the difference is, it's like, in some ways, it's like D1 football versus high school football or D3 football. It's those are some sharp cats up there in college.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah, it's faster too. They do a lot more policy debate in college. They're humming through information. They like speed read and stuff. You got to be on your toes for that one. It's not like Lincoln Douglas debate where you get to talk,
have some prep time.
Yeah, have some. Well, like, just you're not discussing policy. You're just discussing topics. And Lincoln debate's a little slower, and you know, you're discussing issues, the con, the negative of an issue. Policy just is way faster. It's partnered and way more evidence. We would walk into the room with a dolly carrying tubs of evidence.
I was gonna say you're carrying a briefcase
of evidence, and while your partner's speaking, you're in the tub trying to like sift through and find evidence as you're listening to discussions and arguments, and it was insane.
So yeah, that's just a small sample of my world. Obviously, it's a lot slower, and you know, I'm having to kind of adjust to the level of what's going on there because I helped coach UIL debate in Texas, and we had a couple state champions, and those kids were sharp.
Yeah, Texas is good. Yeah, Texas is always good.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's the reason why we are not present with you right now. But Brian Little and other folks that usually join us, Roy in Kansas City. There's just a ton of folks who join us. Sometimes Scott will join us from Texas. This is an interesting topic, and so you guys won't want to miss this today. We're going to get into the Ottawa truckers protest and the haves, the have-nots, the truths, the untruths, and we're just going to lay it all out there and then try to arrive at what is a thoroughgoing Christian position and worldview to help us think through this and make some sense of this. And so, Jason, why don't you lead us in prayer this morning? Then we'll get to our top story.
Yeah. Well, Father, I just pray, Lord, that you would please guide our discussion, give us wisdom and understanding and thoughtfulness and care with our words. I pray that you help us understand your truth and to obey it faithfully, Lord, as we seek to live as sojourners and aliens in this world, citizens of heaven. Yet you call us to honor everyone, to love the brotherhood, to fear God, and honor the emperor. And so help us, Lord, to do that wisely and carefully, and most of all, faithfully, Lord, to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, the comment section will be turned on. We'll go back and we'll review the show. And so please make your comments aware to us. And if there's something that you need us to reach back out to you on, we certainly can do that. As the show is populating here, I will be adding some of the commentary that, at least some of the comments that Jason has by way of outside articles. But there's also a number of articles that are in the show notes today and links that are in the show note today. And so if you want to follow up and with any type of thoroughness to the story that we're going to give you today, then please do so, as you will have those resources available to you. All right, let's get to our top story. So, Jason, go ahead and set the scene up for us here. We have a massive protest that's taking place in Ottawa that has received international attention because this style and this form of protest not only is in Canada, but it is reaching into other parts of the world and people who are protesting. And what are they protesting, and what is this all about?
Well, from my understanding of looking at the story from different people and YouTube and some different things, this protest is I think about this idea that the government.
I think you have a source that is giving us some sound.
I have a source. Sorry about that. That was me.
Yeah, you got some theme music with you this morning.
I'm just talk through that. No, I think what this idea is about is these guys are, they've been cooperative. You got to know something about Canada, right? Canada is like the nicest country in the world.
Oh, Canada! Look how we're giving you a shout out, Canada.
When I lived in Wisconsin and Minnesota, we just always kind of referred to Canadians as our little brothers, right? They're just the junior Americans or whatever, and they would take offense to that. But nevertheless, they're probably the most obedient.
America's JV team.
That's right, America's JV teams. They're the Lutherans to the Catholic squad, whatever you want to call it. The deal is that this group of people is probably the most obedient people to a government I think there is. And so the fact that it's the Canadians that are leading the charge tells you that something is definitely awry. And I think what the deal is they're protesting. It's not about the vaccine because most of them are vaccinated. It's about the government. It's about the media. It's about big tech. It's about big pharma. It's about these massive legacy institutions who are kind of ganging up on the little man, the middle man, the blue collar man. And they're kind of tired of the overreach, and they're telling the government, and they're telling Trudeau, who's the prime minister, that he is divisive, and two, he's reaching far beyond his authority and his means. Not just about COVID. They're talking about these mandates and these laws that are causing people to lose their jobs and their livelihood, and they're starting to become discriminatory. And so they're kind of pushing back on this and saying, no, we're not having this. When we still live in a Western democracy, we have a right to be heard. We have a right to have our voices heard. And so we're going to push back. And so the way they did it, of course, is they they hit the pockets, right? I mean, they stopped one of the major routes of goods from Canada to the United States through Ottawa.
Hey, that money talks, baby.
That it does. When you start,
if there's a formula for protest, it is hit the pocketbooks, and
hit the
people will
pocketbook.
suddenly start paying attention to what your cause is.
And they're breaking that line. It's really not much different than what with the shipyards and the shipping lanes. When they close down, major things happens. Well, when the truckers shut down, logistics shut down, goods and services shut down, the supply and demand goes to bunk, and we're in trouble. And they're making their voice heard. And so they're pushing back against this kind of overreach of the government, this really negative play by the media, the voice of big tech and big pharma that's trying to influence policy, that's really kind of belittling the common man in their opinion, I think. And I think that's what this is really about. So it's
as reported by NPR News, the Freedom Convoy began last month as a caravan of truck drivers who plan to drive to Ottawa to voice their opposition to the government mandate that requires them to be vaccinated against COVID-19 across the U.S.-Canada border. That despite the Canadian Trucking Alliance's own comments that the vast majority of the country's trucking industry is vaccinated, but the narrow focus of the protest grew as people joined and demonstrated, voicing their own grievances against the Canadian government. And so you've got that aspect of it, which is rightly probably called the Freedom Convoy. And then you've got, in any protest, you've got people who then begin to join the movement. And there have been some interesting people from all around the world who have begun to join this from various sides. And so talk to us a little bit about what's going on with, sort of the extension of this and kind of how this is kind of morphed from different angles.
Yeah. Well, they're seeing it take influence in America, obviously. This is kind of right up of our gear house, this kind of protest, but it's also expanding into Europe. I think Norway and England and other places like that. And you're starting to see these similar kind of risings. And on the one hand, it's good because finally the people are kind of standing up who are being governed, saying, hey, we're having enough of this, and you need to stop doing what you're doing. On the other hand, though, any kind of protest, it starts to invite fringe groups and fringe people who will try to malign the I won't say the purity of the protest, but the genuineness or legitimacy of the protest. And so what you have is the big, legacy media attaching itself to a few of the people who are being ridiculous and trying to say that the whole convoy, the whole movement is made up of these right-wing extremists who are trying to destroy democracy.
Can I just put a pin there for just a second? Because I think that's something that I think when you see that played out over and over again, you begin to see that there's a pattern there, at least a pattern of response from one side or the other that says this smaller band of what we're saying here, that's the more radicalized portion or the offset a little bit of what the actual protest is, gets focused on to the degree that people say, well, see, look how bad this protest is, because there was actually somebody who had a Nazi flag there and we saw him. And so that's what the whole thing is about, and beginning to sort of warp what the actual thing is, like you said, the purity of the protest. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Don't you see that pretty much in every protest? I mean, there's Black Lives Matter.
I mean, we saw it the last 2 years in America.
Absolutely. And so I think that's a pattern that at least I'm beginning to see, is like, let's actually figure out what's going on there before we start to extrapolate from one picture or one image or one story, even the totality of what's really there.
Right. Yeah. And you start to see, again, I was telling you before we started the show, the thing about this convoy that's kind of opening my eyes is the reporting of the convoy is so incredibly biased to a narrative that it's going to find whatever it can to fit that narrative. And we saw it in the Black Lives Matter stuff. I mean, it's so interesting. If you want to go back to the Black Lives Matter stuff, it's so interesting that the media is pushing this social justice agenda and equality and all that. And a lot of it's reporting would start to display some of the bad stuff, almost like following that kind of it bleeds, it leads type mentality with this stuff. And you see this contradiction all over the place, and like this intentional stirring. Well, you know, you see the same thing happening with the convoy. Is the majority of the convoy, and I posted an article about a journalist, an independent journalist, who went and did 100 interviews with the convoy and spent time with them, and is pretty much showing that this is a peaceful protest, and these are pretty decent people, and they're just trying to make their voices heard, that it's not what the media is saying they are. And you start to see that story develop, and nobody wants to attach itself to that story. What they want to attach themselves to is the fringe stuff that's happening, because it fits the narrative that Trudeau is putting out there and a few others are putting out there. And this story and this whole thing has just really opened my eyes as to how malicious it is and how intentionally divisive it is. You know, and I think it's really too bad. It's on the flip side, this silver lining to it, Erskin, is it's a great opportunity for individual journalists who have integrity to go do something really cool. Like, you don't have to go follow the legacy media. You could actually go do your own stuff and put it out there. And long as you've got integrity and you've got ethics and you're bringing the story, people will listen now, I think. I think we'll pick it up, you know. And
what Jason is referring to there is we've had times on this show in which we've said, you know, there's big tech, the big pharma, we've got big government, we've got legacy media overreach that's going on out there, and it seems like little guys like Jason and I, like doing a show like this, what can we possibly do that's going to make that big a difference in people's lives? And yet you're beginning to see from these various pockets of in corners of journalism, people who are stepping out of that, you know, bigger framework and saying, hey, I'm going to report on this story and I'm going to give a vantage point and a perspective that is not seen, or at least is not reported. And there's people who are responding to that. And so, yeah, I guess that is a silver lining, to be able to look at the fact that the little guy can now report something and have more, I guess the word would be credibility, than others who are out there reporting from sort of these big platforms that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. The journalist's last name is Subramanyanya. I'm killing it. Subramanyas. It's a very awkward last name, but
okay.
But she is. It's a lady who has received a lot of credit and a lot of praise from people who have maybe kind of realized the legacy media, the downfalls of legacy media, and how this woman's journalism is contrasting the pitfalls of that media, and just her work and her ethics and what she's committed to it. So she's quoted in the Fox News article that I posted. I couldn't find it anywhere else. As a matter of fact, when I went to Google and I tried to search this up, the Ottawa truckers, convoy, I got everything from the New York Times, the Washington Post, to the Wall Street Journal, all the stuff that's being critical of it. And you had to go through pages to finally find somebody who's actually reporting on a different angle. So there you go.
Yeah. What do you make of this gas can subterfuge thing that's going on there?
What are you talking about?
And this is in the show notes for today. But apparently there's water-filled gas cans that are being used as Freedom Convoy protesters as a part of a cat and mouse game that they're playing with the police. The effort is to frustrate the police. Federal officials are saying they would get, the Ottawa police said that on Sunday they're cracking down on anyone who's giving material aid, such as fuel, to the protesters. That's kind of the context of it. On Tuesday, the police revealed that the demonstrators were trying to subvert officers by filling jerry cans with water or just leaving them empty. And it provides a layer of logistical complexity, said Steve Bell, the Ottawa deputy police chief. And so what's apparently happening, and I saw some of the pictures here, is there's ladies who are going down the street with gas cans in their strollers, and it might be empty. And so, are the police going to go up and crack down on all these
Oh,
people?
they're taking resources away to follow her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, what? I don't get if these guys have a right to protest and they're doing it peacefully, and and they're bringing like food and water and stuff. I don't know, man. Like it'd be like kind of almost weird in the way that in the United States, if we were watching protesting happening down on the street, and whether we were for or against it, but we felt like, man, those guys are mid-July and it's hot and we wanted to give them some water. Are you going to arrest us for giving them water? Like it's crazy. Here's the other side of this, right? I'll tell you what really irked me the most about this whole thing. You know, the whole GoFundMe thing that happened.
I was going to talk about that here in just a minute.
Yeah. So that to me kind of sent me over the edge, because what I found was, if the majority of this protest, I mean overwhelming majority of this protest, is peaceful and good, and it's the people standing up, and GoFundMe says, hey, we'll go ahead and support Antifa and all that, but we're going to knock this out. We're going to take $10 million away from these guys, right? It just, to me, was so incredibly full of injustice and bias that and then they were going to give the money away to their own charities, until the DA from Florida piped up and said, we ain't having that.
Yeah.
You got to refund that money. I just thought, what's GoFundMe doing, pulling all that money? The convoy raised more money than both political parties combined this last month. Like the Liberal Party got 3.9 million, and like the Conservative Party raised like 3.7 million, and the convoy raised like 10 million. I know why GoFundMe shut that thing down. It doesn't take an idiot to figure that out.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
That's another aspect of this that I've looked at and I've thought, do what?
Yeah.
And so trying to find all of these, and I guess the gas can thing is, kind of maybe a smaller, lighter example of the fact that there's people who are paying attention to this, and they're saying, I think it's one of those things where people begin to find people who are speaking their language, people who are articulating some of the concerns that they're trying to articulate. And maybe all of us don't have some of the resources to be able to, like, some of us work all the time, and so we're not able to go and protest these things, but they're seeing in this protest something that people have been trying to say for a long time. And I think there's a lot of people who have been trying to say in various ways, the government is overreaching in certain areas. Now, we want to get to maybe a thoughtful discussion of what does that mean in the context of the Christian life when you have a government that is, off the chain, that is not responding in a just manner so far as you see it. Maybe take us a little bit into that part of the story as well.
Yeah, well, that's that's the way forward for the church, right? We got to figure out, well, what do we do with protest, politics, and our government leadership and things of this nature. We've got to take a balanced look at this and obviously work within our laws, right? But then at the same time, just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should do something, right? And so talk about a squirrely answer, because some people look at that right now and say, well, what are you trying to say? These truckers are out of line from a Christian perspective from doing what they're doing? Absolutely not. What I'm saying is the church is going to have to look at this through a different lens. Particularly, I think the lens of 1 Peter 2, and what it's calling us to do as far as our Christian perspective is concerned. And so, that would be the first text that I would run to in a heartbeat to find out, what are we thinking? Peter says to us, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution. Well, that's your government, right? Every institution, whether it be the emperor as supreme or governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil or praise those who do good, right? So all forms of government need to be submitted to, and the laws are obeyed. Now, of course, you always put that in the context of Romans 13, and if they're trying to tell you to stop loving Jesus or following the gospel, you have a legitimate reason to look not to do that. But verse 15 says, "For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of the foolish people." To me, that's an interesting phrase right there. What does it mean? What is the good works he's talking about there by doing good?
Mm-hmm.
Does protesting, lawful protesting, fit inside of the good works he's talking about to put to silence the ignorance of the foolish people?
Now, let me pause it up for just a second there as we kind of develop this idea. But, we can springboard from this topic to a variety of topics and say protesting in general. If you were to try to draw a one-to-one correspondence between the Roman Empire and what we essentially have today, it would be very difficult to do that because the nature of the Roman Empire and the nature of the democracy that we live in, certainly here in the United States, the United States, I should say, affords us the opportunity to have a peaceful redress of grievances that we have as a nation. It's a fundamental right that we have as a country. Now, we don't have to always use that right. And there are some people who would say, maybe even pacifists, that we should never use that right. And we should never use the government or resist the government and any of those type of things, even if it's an unjust law and unjust government. There would be some who would say that. We're certainly not making that argument today. But what we are saying is that in a democracy, we are afforded the opportunity to redress grievances, and we call it justice in our society, because when we believe that there's something that is unjust, Lady Justice or the scales of justice should be equaled out, and we've made provision in our society for us to be able to do that. Now, as a Christian living in the society, how now shall we respond, knowing that that is a privilege that we have to be able to participate in the society? So with that context, continue on, sir.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's the gist of what you just said. So now that the church has to look at what is the will of God. For this is the will of God is for you to submit to your government, and to do good works, and put the foolish people to rest by your good works. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover up for evil. Okay. That's interesting. Can protest be a cover up for evil? Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
emphatically, we're going to say yes, they can.
Sure can, right? So living as servants of God. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor. So that is a if I was preaching to my people and talking to my people about what they're seeing in the convoys, because it's really interesting. Last couple of years, we saw these protests of Black Lives Matter and all these social justice stuff and all kinds of things happened. There were really good protests where the message was clear. There were really bad protests where there was violence. There was Antifa. There's all this. And the church had an opinion, right? A really interesting opinion.
Yeah, I'm about to get to that. I'm about to get to that one, my friend.
And now they turn, and maybe even to the point where they say, these silly protests or whatever. And
we shouldn't be protesting. We just need to preach the gospel and read our Bibles and everything will be all right. No, protests are bad. Oh, those bad protesters. They swallowed the whistle now. Then
we turn to this other protest in Canada that kind of fits our narrative.
Hey, they wallet out. Oh, hey, how much can we give this? How much can we? Hey, write the check. No, just write the check. I know we were going to have food and bread and everything. Just write them a check. We believe in that.
Yeah. Hey, keep that going. And in both cases, though, right?
We wrong for that.
In both cases, we have to come back to what Peter says and says, hey, I'm just curious, if I had Peter with me and he's talking me through this text, what in the world is he telling the church to do? And it sounds like to me, there's an attitude of submissiveness, servanthood that comes first. And that we want to try to live at peace with our government as best we can. And of course, there will be times when protest is legitimate, but it cannot be a cover up for evil.
Yeah,
We
that's
cannot
good.
use the leverage of protest as a cover up, and I think we have to be consistent the way we look at whether it's the Black Lives Matter protest or the Canadian protest. Both have to be held in the same standard of saying, look, if this is just a cover up for evil, then you can have it. I ain't doing it. But the freedom of speech and freedom of religion, those are supposed to be safeguards for the people and the government, right? I mean, that's why they're there. And so there is reason to defend those.
Mm-hmm.
There is reason to protest if those are being violated. You take the freedom of speech away, you're essentially bringing oppression onto all kinds of people, and particularly the church. You take freedom of religion away, and you're being nailed down by pretty much an atheistic, oppressive government, which is what communism does.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody suffers under that. I mean, not just Christians, but everybody suffers.
Yeah.
So there is legitimate reason to rise up and tell the government, no, this is too far. You've got to protect these values.
So let me be clear, because I know there's a lot of people who watch not only our weekend show, although last weekend's show got restricted. That was fun.
It what?
Last weekend's show got restricted when we were talking about Planned Parenthood and Black Lives Matter.
It got restricted.
Yeah.
What
the
does
content, well, they took it down for a second. And then they reviewed it and then they unrestricted it. But then I tried to actually pay to get that show boosted so more people would see it. And Facebook refused my money. They said, we're not going to take your money. It's funny. I tried to pay money to get that more people to see that show because of the content. I felt so strongly about it. And they were like, nope, we're not going to do it. But so anyway, I say all that not to go back to last week. I want to talk about this week. Let me be absolutely clear. Let me look in the camera. Where's the camera? Look in the camera and say, essentially what we're saying is that in the same protest, if you're using that protest, going back to your heart and going back to the impetus behind it, if you're using that protest as a cover up for evil so that you can do nefarious things, then that protest is absolutely wrong. It is sin. It is something that is outside of what the church's responsibility to reach, disciple, teach people, train people, and give people the truth is. So in that aspect of it, the protest would be wrong. But in another aspect of it, as it relates to the good that we ought to do, and I use, Jason, James chapter 4, verse 21. So whoever knows the good that he ought to do and does not do it is guilty of sin. Like there's good things that we ought to do, that we have a responsibility to do, that if you're protesting with that in mind, in a certain sense of humility, then the protest is a good protest.
Right.
And so we're not just coming down one side and saying all protests are bad. Let's just lop it off. Anytime I see a sign with a flag on it, or anytime I see a sign that has something crossed out on it, it's always a bad protest. No, we're not those guys. We're clear about the fact that there can be some good elements to a protest.
Yeah. Again, just having a lens to start to discern things through, right? Which is why the way forward for the church is not to use the pulpit for political advocacy or agenda advocacy, but simply preach the Bible, the gospel, go through letters like 1 Peter, go through James, go through Romans, and teach your people how to live as believers in a Western free democracy that it does allow the right to protest. And what's the lens, and what's the criteria that we're going to engage this, and what's our goal? Hopefully the goal is peace. Hopefully, right? Hopefully the goal is peace and justice. And we're going to do this in a way that glorifies God and loves our neighbor. Loves our neighbor. And the change that we're looking for is hopefully going to be such a thing that we can spread that love that's expansive. It's
and so I wanted to say a little bit about that. Would you cite this as an example of at least the way that we're talking about it, a means to contextualization, a proper contextualization? For instance, like we both are committed to preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. We both are committed to seeing discipleship be the impetus that fuels the church, and the mission of the church being the Great Commission. We're committed to those things. And yet we know as we disciple people, they're going to go out into their workplaces. They're going to go out into places and be salt and light in society in ways that they need to take leadership, in ways that they need to respond. And when they do so, that context by which they are living out the gospel becomes important as to what they do. Is this an example of contextualization?
Yeah, I think so. And just for the record, I don't think contextualization is a bad word. That's gotten a interesting rap because I think some people have used contextualization to water down the gospel or to keep from preaching the full gospel. But I think that we do have to understand our context and who we're ministering to, what the issues are, and how we're going to address those issues of course, the fidelity of the Bible, the gospel, but sensitive to the surroundings that we are working with. I think contextualization is important. It has to be thought of even inside the ministry of the church, because I'm thinking about right now, my own church is walking through just kind of a revisiting of our mission and our vision. And the first thing we had to talk about was our context. I mean, who in the world are we reaching? Well, we came up with five contextual hindrances to the gospel. One is poverty. Another is substance abuse, broken families, uneducated, and unchurched. Well, there's a way to do ministry in St. Louis and in Boston and in Chicago and Nashville. And then there's a way to do ministry in rural mid Illinois, right? Central Illinois. And our context and understanding who we're dealing with is absolutely important with the way we're going to try to bring the fidelity of the gospel to these people. And I think the protest, I think it's the same kind of idea, the same thing fits.
Sure. And then also the resources that you have available to do those sort of things.
Right.
I think that's important. The statement that I wrote down with Jason and I were discussing this sort of off camera before the show and just kind of trying to feel each other out a little bit, where we're going to land the plane on this. And I'd written down something in my notes today that I said, I'm going to just reveal this on the show. But protest as a tool of reform. Now we're talking about the good side of that, not the side where we're trying to cover up for evil,
right?
But protest as a tool of reform. Like the world that we have now, there's some people that look at it and they're like, they raise their hands and they say, it's all going down. We just need to duck and cover, put our head in the sand, build our bunkers, try to keep everybody else out, only invite our friends in, and we can survive this Holocaust that we're going to experience. There's some people who believe like that, but I'm on the other side of that and just say, hey, we have some unprecedented opportunities, and protest with the mindset that we're talking about today as a tool of reform, as an opportunity of seeing things that have not been in place suddenly get fixed as a result of people who are good people being involved in those. Like, imagine the mayor of a city that changes from a non-believer to a believer who cares about these concerns and then also expresses a genuine type of love for Christ and others. Imagine the police chief who becomes a believer or is already a believer having that position of authority. And so I think it does matter that we begin to see our citizenship, and that is a context that is unique to us here in America, as being a place where we have the opportunity to see some things change because of our involvement.
Oh, as soon as you said protest is a tool of reform, I mean, we're Protestant. So you have to go back to Martin Luther, who...
we would always go back to Martin Luther.
Right?
Calvin. That's kind of how we flow, though.
You have to, in many regards, because here was a guy who was devoutly Catholic. I mean, he did not want to come against the Catholic Church, and his heart was not to start a revolution against the Catholic Church. That wasn't his desire. But he saw some atrocities and some injustices, and he saw some heresy, and he saw some things that were just not right, to the point where he had to protest. He had to use that protest as a tool of reform for the church's sake, and then for the people he was ministering to. And so he goes and nails the 95 Theses to the wall on Halloween, right? And here you see an example in church history where God used a reformer like him to bring about change in the gospel. And so, and if you even look at protests in even a biblical light, the whole Christian life, in a sense, is an affront to the demonic kingdom and the kingdom of darkness. And we live a whole life of protest against that. So it's not that it's out of our blood to do so. It's just wielding it rightly for that tool of reform, to do it in a way that actually glorifies God, and is faithful to the scriptures and faithful to our neighbors.
That's a good point. That's a
It
good point.
bothers me that protest is used in a way to not love your neighbor. That's troublesome. I don't care what side of the aisle you fall on. Love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, soul, and strength, right? And love your neighbors yourself. With that context, fine. Go into your protest, go into the protest and seek change, right? And that's what I would love to see the church do more of if they're going to engage in this consistently, right?
Yes.
Because
And I would say not only consistently, but also authentically. I think there's sometimes the church responds in a knee-jerk manner, and that is seen as disingenuous by some, because
yeah,
the church is oh, now the church wants to say something about it.
yeah,
Now
right.
that other people brought the issue up, something that you knew about,
Yes.
now all of a sudden you want to be involved in discussion. How convenient for you to now want to have it come and tell everybody what they need to do, because you have not been involved in this discussion the whole way. So yeah, so I think consistently and authentically.
I think that authentically means that you're willing to look at, say, for instance, the Black Lives Matter protest and give it a real look, and not just blow it off as a bunch of people entitled whoever or misguided whoever who are just wreaking havoc on our good time American values and our good time American system and all that. That you're actually willing to give a listen and a hear, right? And you're not going to fall victim to the fringe people who are doing the insane stuff. You're actually going to have real conversations with people who are hurt and generally upset. And it's so interesting that one of the things I can say that I've enjoyed about our show is that you and I have fought hard to try to be that voice that says, look, we're going to give it a listen and we're going to hear and we're going to try to understand. I may not agree with it. I may not even understand it entirely, but I'm going to give you the respect and the dignity to understand. And I'm going to do the same thing for the Canadian truckers. I'm going to do the same thing for Black Lives Matter. And there are things that just annoyed me to no end about the Black Lives Matter thing. But then there were things that was really enlightening to me that said, man, I should rethink some things and try to be willing to have more discussions about it. Like when we went down and talked to Coach Dickerson in St. Louis, and you went and talked to the fellow in Milwaukee. That's just.
It's been a learning process. And I think that's one of the things that we need to open ourselves up to, is being able to learn something that we don't already know. It's interesting. I was having a discussion with somebody about Western Christianity, and largely that's where we've positioned ourselves. Our family's preparing to go to Africa this summer, and it'll be my seventh time in Africa. We went and lived in India for a little while. And so I've got a lot of experience traveling other places in the world. And one of the things that strikes me as odd sometimes is when I hear a story that has such a Western oriented slant to it. And I know I'm in that context, and so that's what it would have. But it seems to do the same thing that we're talking about here. It extrapolates all Christianity as what you see in the West.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, man, there are, although we have some sort of dramatic differences in canonization, there are some Coptic Christians that I can kind of rock with some of what it is that they're saying, and then some Armenian Christians. And I'm like, okay, some of the folks in India, they're coming at it from a different vantage point, but okay, like Africa, like I'm starting to see some things. And so the totality of what Christianity is, and especially what contemporary Christianity is in the world today, is dramatically different than what you see, based on your top 3 searches that you have of, what's going on in the Western context.
Yeah. No, and that's why one of the fruits of globalism, if there is such a fruit, is this access we have to ideas and what people are saying in Africa. Whereas before, I mean, we were so isolated because we just didn't have the internet. We didn't have, you had to travel and do all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I can now read guys in Africa. I can now listen to stories and see things. And now I have more opportunity to go than I ever had before. And to the church's benefit in the West, it would do them well to do more of that.
Yeah.
Or at least begin to get more of those voices at our conferences, like our gatherings, right? To start listening and hearing what's
Absolutely.
going on. Yeah.
So we can talk about that some other time. I'd be interested in maybe following this trail, because I know by the time we do another show, it'll still be Black History Month. And I'm wanting to say, I see things getting dramatically better because of some of the discussions that we've been having. Now, it'll be interesting to see what history records. History is either going to say this is a period that has been unprecedented in the way that things have gotten worse because of some of the rhetoric and CRT and all these different things. That does fit a certain narrative, and that is what you would expect to see happen, and that is what maybe some people want to see happen. But I actually have a different take on that because of some of the discussions that are going on there. I think there's actually a lot of people, at least that I'm talking to, who have a deeper level of appreciation, understanding, knowledge of people like Ida B. Wells. And it's not just, oh yeah, there was Rosa Parks and there was Martin Luther King, and that's the only people that we ever talk about. Like I'm hearing names and I'm like, yeah, I remember that name. Yeah, I haven't heard people talk about that name before. It just seems like there's more awareness of what's going on, and what has gone on in the unique contributions of African Americans in our country than there ever has been. And so I'm actually encouraged by that and thinking things are getting better. I'd love to hear your take on that in a future show.
Yeah, no, I would love to think on that for a future show. Because I can see the silver lining. One of the things that kind of excites me about Gen Z, with all their wanky little things, one of the things that really excites me is their willingness to, or their desire to want to connect at deeper levels, and the things that they're drawn to authenticity, and they seem to be drawn to, don't try to make me real. Don't give me something gimmicky. Don't give me something that's this kind of cookie cutter thing. I want real relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And what's cool about that is they're not going to allow this nonsense that's been happening. Let's just stay in our own little box and not worry about the people outside of us. Hey, let's just keep it all homogeneous. We don't need to worry about any other people coming in. I just don't see them tolerating that. I see them saying, look, we need to have better relationships with each other in our community. We need to go out and diversify our church. And again, diversity is not an evil word. It's not a bad word, because it's all over the New Testament in regards of what heaven's going to look like. It's going to have multiple ethnicities, and it's going to have a diversity of people and things. And I think Gen Z, who's coming up, if we can get them in the church and give them that solid theology, because I think that's another thing they want, is I think they deep down, they just want to know the truth. And then not the YouTube truth, not the Google truth, but the real truth. And so when these guys are discipled and raised up in the Lord, I see them making huge strides in racial reconciliation. I see them making massive ties to other communities, and you start to see a more globalized church, a united church. It might be a little smaller. It might not look like the mega stuff we're seeing now, but I think you're going to see a more complete face of Christ in the church. You want to say it that way?
Yeah.
I think that's something that's on the forefront. I just don't know if, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to do that show right now. Obviously, we can prep for such a show, but I would be interested to see what we would find if we would turn that stone over. Because on the other side of that, I'm sure there would be people who say, man, this is the worst that it's ever been in terms of race relations and the tension between people. And sometimes I hear that, but, I'm the man on the street. I'm not in some kind of ivory tower or, city councilman or anything. I'm the man on the street. And so some of the discussions that I'm having and some of the families that I'm seeing who are Caucasian families who are adopting African-American children in the foster system, and watching that and thinking, well, there's automatically some discussions about ethnicity and inclusiveness that are going to take place in that family, because they're dealing with a set of realities that they're going to face with regards to diversity that, they're going to have to navigate.
I know when I'm preaching to Ecclesiastes right now. And of course, I'm talking about the meaningless world, right? So everything is meaningless really apart from Christ. And so I'm having to tie Jesus back in. And in the process of giving that weightiness, I often talk a little bit about the polarization of our times and the intensity of our times. And I never leave. I don't think I leave the people there. I always bring them back to Christ and how he's going to restore things and do things even now. And then when he comes back, but I guess I look at it from the lens, typically from the church. I just don't know if it's going to get any better for the church. Maybe that's where my hesitancy is.
Yeah, and we can certainly go down that road as well. Hey man, it's been a great show today. Our top story today was the Ottawa truckers. And check that out today. If you missed any part of the broadcast and you're just now joining us, all the show notes are there for you to be able to follow this in its entirety. I think the development that we had there at the end of it was good. So if you just saw the end part of that, golden. The church is moving forward, and we're going to continue to respond to the needs that are around us and continue to present Christ and disciple people and make disciples. And so, Jason, thank you so much for joining today. We're about ready to close down the show. Let me let you get the last word in.
Yeah, I just want to encourage the church to be discerning about when protests are arising, and whether you're gravitating towards this idea of being defensive towards a protest, or you're gravitating towards the idea of joining a protest. Of course, it's under law. It's the rightful, peaceful protests are allowed in our democracy, and that's good. But what I would like you to do is just remind yourself of 1 Peter and develop a lens, a discernment, right? It's the will of God that by doing good, you put to silence the ignorance of fools, right? Live as people who are free, but don't use your freedom as a cover up for evil. I think that is so insightful when you're trying to discern how on board you're going to be with a protest, or how against you're going to be for a protest, to discern the righteousness and justice and equality of a protest, and just do so with the kingdom of God in mind and loving your neighbor. That's what I would commend you.
Amen. And with that, we shut down this show of The Way Forward. Your comments are always welcome. Look forward to seeing you guys and hearing from you guys very soon. It's The Way Forward.